but it's part of our brokenness that we can, at one and the same time, acknowledge that we have a God who is 1,000 times beyond what we deserve, and yet still yawn through church. And then there were 8. One day a world full of people, as full as it had ever been. Everyone was eating and drinking, marrying and being given in marriage. Not a care in the world. Doing what we wanted, whenever we wanted, with whoever we wanted. The sound of partying and revelry would have been filling the air. A world full of gods in human form. And then the next day, 8 with an eerie silence, except perhaps the straining of wood beams as the ark was being moved around on the waves. Everything and everyone they'd known, gone. Neighbors, businesses, places, everything gone. Except God. There they were, with nothing and no one to look at but God. They were learning the lesson. If all you ever have in life is God, even if the whole world is against you, it's enough. Just floating around, seemingly aimless, beginning to harvest that which will become quite common for the human family, experiencing the pain of wilderness that comes as a direct result of human rebellion. Every inclination of our hearts, only evil all the time, resulted in the act of uncreation, God bringing back the waters that he once separated in order to produce life and to provide us a place to live in loving fellowship with him. And now the rejection of loving fellowship with him has meant no place to live, and the waters coming back and bringing death with each new wave. The masses had rejected him, wanted nothing to do with him, and so in all fairness, he granted them the desires of their heart. And now in this chapter, it would have been something at least, if verse 21 read, "Never again will I curse the ground because of man, because now eventually he has learned his lesson." That would have been something. But when it reads, "Never again will I curse the ground because of man," even though every inclination of his heart is evil. It's almost as though God is saying, if I have to flood them every time for this type of rebellion, I'll be doing it on a daily basis. So God has a choice, or had a choice, to give up on the whole idea altogether. Wash his hands of the whole sorry lot of us. Rid himself of these stubborn, prideful, arrogant renegades, and perhaps in its place create a world where he would hear nothing but grateful praise and witness nothing other than glad-hearted obedience. Or he could choose to suffer with us, choose to suffer among us, choose to suffer from us, and eventually suffer as one of us. Thankfully, he chose the latter. Perhaps the God of the Bible can be accused of many things, but something no one can accuse him of is shirking at the size of the investment it was going to take to win us back. But what a bleak and sad state of affairs. I'm beyond convinced that God neither desires nor wants our sympathy, but it's difficult not to feel sorry for him. And I know he knew that it was going to happen, even from before the creation of the world. But we've discussed this before. There are certain things that foreknowledge doesn't prevent, and pain is one of them. Just because you see the fist coming doesn't make it less painful when it connects to the nose. It might prepare us a little, but it doesn't prevent it. And this chapter opens, as the book opens, God moving over the face of the deep, over the waters, as he seeks to recreate the world. Except this time, his feelings on sin and rebellion have been undeniably expressed. This time the humans on board this globe have no misunderstanding. And now that we know his heart on the matter, there's no need for him to express it every time we take a step out of line. When we act like they acted prior to the flood, but we don't receive the same punishment, we must understand that's only by grace. And it's a grace that the foolish will take lightly. It's woeful nearsightedness and altogether stupid to mistake God's patience for approval. Thankfully, following the destruction, the chapter opens in hope with the words, God remembered Noah. There's going to come a day where you're going to be glad that he remembered your name too. After a similar type of destruction, may I add. The original fall in the garden had God blessing us prior to the curse. Now he's going to bless us after the curse. And like any loving father who, after disciplining his child, seeks nothing but loving fellowship again, so we find God. The Hebrew writer insists that we view all discipline this way, that it's coming from the hand of a loving Father who is treating us like children. Indeed, the discipline that was dealt out that day was given for that very purpose, to sober the mind of the human family and all subsequent generations. The flood was the greatest spanking we ever received, and it still sobers the mind of those who understand what it says. And therefore the flood is still fulfilling its purpose, and thereby proving the righteousness, the practicality, the wisdom, and the success of the act itself. It still amazes me when, and I know we've discussed this in question and answer periods, but it still amazes me when, after I discipline Will, he's always more likely to want hugs, more likely to sit behind me and watch TV, more likely to speak thoughtfully and treat his mother with respect. And this is what we see when they come out of the ark. They build an altar and sacrifice to their God and rededicate themselves to their God. And because there is only them, it's therefore the rededication of the human family. It's the garden being worked again. Having been graciously and lovingly spanked, the human family now responds with the expressed desire for loving fellowship with their Father. I can't imagine those 8 people came out of the ark as the same people they went in as. If the destruction of the earth and bobbing around doesn't sober the mind, there's probably little hope for us. And in response to their sacrifice and recommitment to Him, God recommits Himself to them. God says, I'm never going to do that again. In fact, I'm going to make you a promise. That will be as bad as it will ever get. If we had sensed that God acted out of wild, uncontrolled anger, then we would want nothing to do with Him. Because who in their right mind would want to spend eternity always having to look over our shoulders for the next divine tantrum? It's because we know the spanking was delivered from a hand that loves us that we can trust Him. And of course, it's partly the reason why parents do discipline their children, because we know that if we don't, or if we won't discipline our children, the world certainly will. And when they do it, it won't be a hand filled with love, compassion, and grace that's bringing it. So it's a spanking we received. It's a spanking we deserved. And it's a spanking we will always deserve. The fact that He won't bring upon us another global flood is only by His gracious promise. It's not that we've got our act together. And to take His inaction in this regard as some kind of stamp of approval would be to err fantastically. or to think that the post-flood God has somehow changed toward us, toward sin and toward rebellion, would be to err fantastically. It would be a tragedy to come away from the flood episode thinking that God doesn't flood me or us because I'm or we're better than the pre-flood people. Let me say that again. It would be a tragedy to come away from the flood episode thinking that God doesn't repeat that because the post-flood people are better than the pre-flood people. That's not what this passage is saying. In fact, that's the opposite of what this passage is saying. It's saying we are as evil. Verse 21 again, just so that we're clear. Never again will I curse the ground because of man, even though every inclination of his heart is, not was, is evil from childhood. God's assessment of the post-flood humanity is identical to pre-flood humanity. That's what makes his goodness toward us so good. The promise of future blessing isn't given because we've learned our lesson. If that was the case, we might conclude the future blessing will be removed when it's clear we haven't learned our lesson. He can't base a promise on the idea that we have or will learn our lesson, because we won't learn our lesson. The promise of future blessing, the promise of his steadfast presence, the promise of his commitment toward redeeming us and winning us back, none of it appears due to our own righteousness or because we somehow compare better. In fact, all of God's promises are spoken into the reality of sin, rebellion, and godlessness. It's God standing up to our hate and evil and telling it in no uncertain terms, I'm not backing it down. I know you're not changing. Neither am I. And we're going to see who wins when the dust settles. It's God holding the bully's face to the ground to show us who love him that we've backed the winner. The flood, in no uncertain terms, tells us that when we back the world, we're placing the wrong bet. Post-flood also makes it clear that when we witness God being merciful and compassionate, it's not because he's incapable of anything else. You know, we have people like this, right? We have people who turn the other cheek because they have no choice in the matter. They're weak. We have people who aren't bullies, but it's because they can't be bullies. They hold no threat. They're weak. They couldn't bully someone if their life depended upon it. They would be laughed at if they tried to bully someone. Being passive for them or being submissive from them isn't a virtue. They have no choice in the matter. But we have other people, and you've met them, who are strong. They are powerful people who could bully, who could be a tyrant, but who don't and who aren't. When they refuse to exploit the weak, it's because they've chosen to be meek. It's because they've chosen to get a handle on their strength and not use it to exploit the weakness of others. So God's grace and kindness, goodness and patience comes to us not because that's all he's capable of. It comes because that's what he chooses for us. And the flood proves it. The entire biblical witness is arranged in such a way as to make clear to us that the one who is doing the choosing chooses by a whole different standard. Oftentimes, most of the time, arguably all of the time, choosing the polar opposite way that the world would choose. So we don't look at the flood and conclude, man, those were some bad people back then. We look at the flood and we think, man, we are some bad people. That we can bring that from God. And it isn't overkill that they all got wiped off the face of the earth. It's grace that we don't get wiped off the face of the earth. It's comical, terrifyingly comical, to listen to these big hitters or politicians or big guys in business, to listen to them all speaking as though some of us don't know precisely who and what they are. And they speak about what they're going to do and what we're going to achieve. And they speak as though man is capable of this and man's achievements in science and we're going to do that. And they speak as though Hitler never existed. As though we've forgotten about Stalin and Genghis Khan. As though we've forgotten about all these people. There they are extolling the virtues of humanity as though we don't know who we are and what we are. Saying it with a straight face. While those of us with even a brief knowledge of history are looking at them saying, they're not serious, right? This is only since I've been on the planet. Are you ready? This is only since I've been on the planet. 2 years after I was born, they were predicting that the oil would be gone in 10 years. We now know that we've got hundreds of years left in oil. A year after that, in 1967, they told us the world would be ravaged by famine by 1975. In 1968, they warned of an overpopulation crisis. I think we've doubled twice since then. In 1969, they told us that everyone would be gone by 1989. By 1970, they warned us that all the world's natural resources would be gone by the year 2000. In 1970, they told us that urban citizens would require gas masks by 1985. They told us in 1970 also that the nitrogen buildup would pollute all the land. Also telling us in 1970 that all the fish are eventually going to die. 1970, that was a good year. 1970, also the killer bees, remember, they were going to come and chase us out of our house. 1970 again, they warned us that there would be an ice age by the year 2000. In 1970, again, I tell you, they must have been trying to sell some product in 1970. It was a most favourable year. 1970, they told us that water would be rationed by 1974 and food rationed by 1980. 1971, the ice age had shifted. It was now going to come between 2020 and 2030. In 1972, they shifted it again. The ice age was going to come in 2070. In 1972, you understand, they have to keep updating it because the years advance and people are like, didn't they say it would all end by now? 1972, the oil would be depleted now by 1992. 1974, the space satellites confirm the advancing ice age. 1974, the ozone depletion will end all life on Earth. 1976, the planet will be cooling and the famines are imminent. In 1977, now the oil will be gone by the 1990s. 1978, they told us there's no end in sight to global cooling. 1980, they told us that acid rain would end all life. Remember that one? 1980, they updated the oil depletion again. Now it would be gone by the year 2000. 1988, they told us that there would be regional droughts all over the world. 1988, they told us that the Maldives would be underwater by 2018. 1989, they told us that nations will be obliterated by the year 2000 by rising sea levels. In 1989, they told us that New York's west side would be underwater by 2019. In the year 2000, they told us that the next generation of children wouldn't know what snow is. In 2002, they told us that the worldwide famine would come if we didn't stop eating fish, meat and dairy. They told us in 2004 that Britain would be like Siberia by the year 2024. In 2005, they told us that Manhattan would be underwater by 2015. In 2006, remember, they were promising that super hurricanes were coming and they will ravage the planet. In 2008, they told us that the Arctic would be ice-free by 2018. In 2008, Al Gore, you'll remember, predicted that the Arctic would be ice-free by 2030. 1 year later, Al Gore announces that we have 96 months to save the world. In 2019, the British Prime Minister announced to Britain that we had 50 days to save the world. In 2009, Al Gore moves his 2013 prediction to 2014. And in 2013, Arctic will be free of ice by 2015. Those of you who keep up with all of this will know that in the last couple of years, there has never been more ice in the Arctic and it has never been thicker. I didn't even mention half of them. Half of them. Remember, God had a word with Israel and said, hey, if someone comes and prophesies something and it doesn't happen, I want you to take him outside and kill him. These people are lucky that the world isn't a theocracy. And yet we see all of this. I lived through it. I know you've lived through it. Those around us have lived through it. And there they are again in front of the TV. Really? Oh no. It's going to end wrong, going to end wrong, going to end wrong, going to end wrong, going to end wrong. Hey, it's going to end. Is it? A world full of chicken littles all running around. And if it wasn't so pathetic, it would be hilarious. This is who we are. I'm showing you the pattern to show you that even in your lifetime, nothing has changed. It's who we are. It's what we are. It's a Savior we got because it's saving we need. Never more clearly seen in our ability to be willfully duped. And in spite of this type of behavior going on year after year after year, what do we really have? What do we really have? What do we really have? We have seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. The same promise that was spoken thousands and thousands of years ago. A promise that has remained true to every single generation without fault. And the world speaks and we have people abandoning God. Never been wrong. He's never been wrong. The world shouts and we're all under our bed again. God help us. What we do have is what we're reading in chapter 8. God saying, as long as this continues, as long as I tarry, you're going to have seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. And we're going to have that because we have a God who is going to choose to love us. That we don't spend our days, every day, all day, in grateful praise and astonishment at his patience and kindness toward us is staggering. But it's part of our brokenness that we can, at one and the same time, acknowledge that we have a God who is 1,000 times beyond what we deserve and yet still yawn through church. And I'm not saying we shouldn't yawn through church. Dear God, we have enough people gifted in making us yawn through church. I'm just saying that we're incapable of not yawning through church. We're broken at levels we don't even know exist. It's a Savior we got because it's saving we need. And next week when we get into chapter 9, we're going to find not only did he decide not to give up on us, not only has he decided not to destroy us the second we deserve it, we're going to find him making a covenant with us. Wrap your head around that. We're going to see him saying to us, you can hold me to account. Someone made up the God of the Bible from imagination. Give me a break. I've saw the gods that we make up. The last God we would ever make up is the God of the Bible. Thoughts, comments, questions?